Hello again. Welcome back to Story Time with Nana Lynn and Glow. I'm continuing helping Gloria out with Another's Treasure, and we are on Chapter 10. Shall we find out what happened? Oh my, Mary said in a frightened whisper. Maybe the thieves are still inside. We should look. Elizabeth pointed at Pal, who waited calmly next to them. If anyone was here, we'd know it. Whoever broke in is gone now. Martha put the rifle down on a nearby table. This place is a mess. She pointed at her sisters. Don't touch anything. I'll call the police. I doubt seriously if the police are going to dust for fingerprints in a second-hand store, Elizabeth said. This isn't like those crime shows that you watch. Humor me, Martha said firmly. Leave everything alone until the police say it's okay. Mary let out a deep breath. Fine, but we'll be here all night cleaning up. How are we supposed to open tomorrow? As Martha left to get her phone, Elizabeth put an arm around Mary. We'll do the best we can. Maybe we can move some of this for now. Elizabeth let go of her younger sister. The back. I didn't think to check. The two women hurried to the back of the barn, where items that hadn't been added to the inventory yet were stored. Sure enough, the thieves had been there as well. Many things were knocked over and thrown around. Oh dear, Mary said. This lamp is broken, and so is this beautiful mirror. We're going to have to pay for everything that's ruined, Elizabeth said, trying not to get emotional. We're talking hundreds of dollars. We have insurance, right? Sure, but there's a high deductible. Mary and Elizabeth stared at each other for a minute. Well, why would someone do this? There's nothing that valuable in here, Mary said, her voice breaking. Although Elizabeth, too, felt like sitting down and having a good cry, she said instead, everything will be all right. We'll put in a claim and see what the insurance pays, and we'll take whatever we need out of our savings. She smiled at her sister. We'll be up and running again in no time. Mary seemed to find some solace in Elizabeth's assurances and went off to find out what was missing or destroyed. Elizabeth surveyed the large room. Although she hadn't memorized everything in the shop, she had a pretty good recall. So far, she hadn't noticed anything missing. It seemed that whoever broke in didn't come just to steal from them. They were obviously looking for something in particular. But what? Did someone else know about Anita's treasure? Could they possibly know what it was? Oh, don't be silly, she said to herself. If Anita can't figure it out, how could anyone else know? But as she carefully considered her position, she realized it was possible. Where did Warren get his so-called valuable piece? If he'd purchased it, whoever sold it to him would know the value. Did they suspect that Anita might not have had any idea how much the piece was worth, whatever it might be? People in town knew she was trying to collect all the items she'd placed at second-hand Blessings. Would the original owner conclude that it had something to do with the object he'd sold to Warren? And would he try to retrieve it? Ignoring Martha's advice, Elizabeth began picking up items that had been knocked over, setting them upright, making sure they weren't damaged, and moving the broken lamp and mirror to the side. She used her flashlight to look carefully on the ground in case the person responsible had dropped something that might lead to their identification. When she couldn't find anything, she straightened up and sighed. Heavens to Betsy, she said softly. This isn't murder, she wrote, and you certainly aren't Jessica Fletcher. The series was one of Elizabeth's all-time favorite shows. Where was Jessica when you needed her? At least they had the scrap of material. I told you not to move anything, Martha exclaimed as she walked to the back of the barn. Why won't you listen to me? Look, I only picked up things back here. I didn't touch anything. If they want to dust for fingerprints, they have plenty of opportunities. Besides, our fingerprints are already on these. Mary came up behind Martha. I've been looking over our inventory. I can't find anything missing. She frowned at Elizabeth. What about you? Elizabeth shook her head. Not a thing. I think whoever broke in was looking for something specific. Did either of you hear a car drive away? Martha asked. If our intruder was escaping, it seems we should have heard an engine or something. Elizabeth and Mary shook their heads. Nothing, Mary said. Hey, that's odd. Obviously they parked away from the house and walked up the driveway so we wouldn't hear them. She paused for a moment. If they planned to steal a lot, wouldn't they need a car to put it in? I mean, you can't hold as much in your hands as you can in your car. Well, not if they're only looking for one thing, Elizabeth said. Something they could carry away without too much trouble. Or maybe they're Amish, Mary said. You know, they drove their buggy. Martha stared at her like she had cucumbers growing out of her ears. Elizabeth fought an urge to laugh. We haven't had much trouble with Amish robbers, Mary. Wow, sis, Martha said. Do you know anything about the Amish? Of course I do. I grew up here. But I know they aren't perfect. Of course not, Elizabeth said gently. But I suspect we can rule out the Amish. Mary shrugged. Okay, fine. So you think someone parked near the road and walked to the barn? Maybe, or maybe they were afraid we'd recognize their vehicle. You're right, Martha said slowly. I had thought of that. Elizabeth headed out of the barn with the flashlight in front of her. Sure enough, the wet dirt road that led to their house showed footprints. Do they look like men's or women's prints? Martha asked as she walked next to Elizabeth. I'm not sure. Could be a man's with small feet or a woman with large feet. The only thing I can say for sure is that whoever this is was wearing sneakers. You can see the tread on the bottom. But everyone and their dog wears sneakers nowadays, so that doesn't help much. Well, what about the car tracks? Martha asked. We could check the road. At that very moment, a police car turned off the main road and drove down the long dirt driveway to their house. Well, that's out of the question now, Elizabeth said. The women waited as the cruiser neared them. Bird in Hand didn't actually have its own police department. They were covered by the East Lampeter Township Police Department. The car pulled up next to them and two officers got out. Got a call that you'd been robbed? The officer who spoke had a friendly face. Elizabeth guessed him to be a few years older than she was. His dark hair was sprinkled with gray, and his steady blue eyes held a distinct hint of kindness. He was tall and had a commanding presence. Something about him encouraged trust. However, his partner, a woman probably in her late 20s, didn't look quite as accommodating. Yes, Elizabeth replied, we have a second-hand shop in our barn. Someone broke in and made a mess. Can you tell us what's missing? The woman asked. Her tone was no nonsense, and suddenly Elizabeth felt a little bit intimidated. Elizabeth frowned at her. We're not sure they took anything, but they certainly caused some damage. They didn't steal anything? The female officer looked annoyed. Elizabeth felt her chest tighten. Was she making fun of them? I'm Elizabeth Clausen, she said sternly. And these are my sisters, Martha and Mary. Who are you? I'm Officer Marks, the male officer said, and this is Officer Jackson. Why don't you show us the crime scene? This way, officers, Martha said briskly. Elizabeth could tell that Martha had no intention of allowing the police to make light of their situation. Officer Marks seemed genuinely concerned, but his partner acted as if she had something more important to do. Elizabeth tried to push down her rising irritation. The officers entered the barn, and Elizabeth showed them the broken window and the items tossed around. Then she led them back to the barn. I straightened this up some, she said, but we left everything else alone, in case you wanted us for fingerprints. Officer Jackson shook his head. It wouldn't do any good. Public goes through here, I assume. Elizabeth nodded. Then there are too many fingerprints for us to process. She shrugged. Besides, if anything's been stolen, then we will need to file a report, Officer Marks said, cutting off his partner. This is vandalism, if nothing else. He frowned at Elizabeth. How can you be certain nothing was taken? This place is pretty full. I have a pretty good memory, but we'll go through our inventory list to be certain. That's a good idea. Let's get some information from you now, and then after you check your list, you can contact me. He smiled at Elizabeth, and she felt her heart beat a little faster. That would be fine, officer. What would you like us to do now? Is there some place we could sit down and fill out some paperwork? Would you like to come into the house? There's coffee. She pointed to a couple of chairs near the wall. Or we could just sit over there. The house would be fine. He turned toward Officer Jackson. I want you to go through everything. Make sure whoever broke in here didn't leave something behind. Anything that might help us identify them. We can see the point of entry, but how did they get out? And get lots of pictures. Check around the windows to see if there's any chance of fingerprints. But I'll expect a full report, Officer Jackson. 2 pink spots appeared on the young officer's cheeks. Elizabeth fought the urge to smile triumphantly at her. Why don't you follow me, Martha suggested. Maybe together we can find a clue. Mary, who hadn't said anything to the officers, winked at Elizabeth. Strangely, Officer Jackson's attitude seemed to help the sisters shake off some of their shock over the break-in. Elizabeth headed for the house with Officer Marks beside her. What could she share with him? Should she explain about the missing treasure? Her first instinct was to keep the real story to herself. But if Anita wasn't trying to hide the truth, why should she? Besides, the situation was beginning to get a little scary. Could they actually be in danger? I don't know. I guess we'll have to find that out next time in chapter 11. We'll see you in the next video.